Well, I think that's a great starting point, and I'd just like to, I don't mean to be pedantic with the semantics of it, but there is a fundamental difference between sustainable hospitality and tourism and regenerative hospitality and tourism. So I try to shy away from and have to have some discipline in separating the two. They are not one and the same. Unfortunately, they're used interchangeably under the broader umbrella of responsible or ethical or mindful travel and tourism. Sustainability is just maintaining the status quo.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Social Hotelier podcast with me, Sam-Erik Ruttmann. Join us for an engaging conversation with Chalana Perera, the visionary founder of Retrace Hospitality. With a career spanning hotel development for global brands like Citizen M Hotels and advisory roles for private and government agencies, Chalana is a leader in regenerative tourism. A climate reality leader and the first Sri Lankan to sign the Tourism Declares Climate Emergency initiatives, he's shaping the future of sustainable hospitality, from tackling over-tourism to championing cultural preservation. Chalana offers a fresh perspective on creating meaningful travel experiences, so don't miss out on this thought-provoking discussion that will inspire hoteliers and changemakers alike. So welcome, Chalana. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Sam-Erik. Thanks for having me.
Well, we have known each other for a few years, and I'm always intrigued of your development. But I think initially the first question is that you have been now involved with looking for the sustainable hospitality and regenerative. How is the industry accepting the fact that there have to be something done about things? I think things cannot go on the way it has been traditionally.
Well, I think that's a great starting point, and I'd just like to, I don't mean to be pedantic with the semantics of it, but there is a fundamental difference between sustainable hospitality and tourism and regenerative hospitality and tourism. So I try to shy away from and have to have some discipline in separating the two. They are not one and the same. Unfortunately, they're used interchangeably under the broader umbrella of responsible or ethical or mindful travel and tourism. Sustainability is just maintaining the status quo, right? It is sustaining. It is doing less harm. Regeneration is about doing more good at every touch point, right? Sustainability is about we are not going to damage, whereas regeneration is about we're going to proactively improve, right? So there's a fundamental difference in the terminology. So my work focuses on regenerative tourism, not sustainable tourism, because the way we're going, it's pretty unsustainable, and we don't have much left as a planet to sustain. But it's about replenishing those resources, be them natural, human, social, etc. So the industry globally, they don't really have a choice. I think they're recognizing the need for it, right? Because the traveler experience is being degraded by overcrowding in certain destinations. The product is being degraded because biodiversity is collapsing, and the whole spiel around marketing, destinations for their seasons. Right now, it's January in Sri Lanka. It's the fourth week of January. Typically, if you take all historic records, it's the most pleasant weather on this island at the last week of January. It is gray skies, really cloudy, and I haven't seen the sun for a couple of days, right? And we've had a fair amount of rain as well, and just very bizarre, not January weather. So governments and companies are recognizing that they are no longer in control when it comes to the tourism narrative. So to answer your question, what does this mean for the regenerative tourism space? Well, the reason regenerative tourism exists is because there's a lot of problems that need to be fixed and a lot of healing that needs to be done.
Yeah. So what challenges do these businesses and the government face in implementing policies, and how can they be overcome? It's recognized that things cannot go on as they have, but particularly Sri Lanka, where you are based, and can you just address a little bit how the challenges and how they how you see they should be able to overcome them?
Yeah, so I think the principal driver for tourism anywhere in the world, if it's lesser developed countries or developing countries like where I am in Sri Lanka, an emerging economy, versus more established and mature economies like where you may be in Northern Europe, um, there's one common denominator, that is tourism is seen as an economic driver. And what does that mean? It's simply economic fundamentals. It's money, right? So the big challenge that government has is obviously how do you shy away from potential revenue when you have to address pain points like carrying capacity and resource management, right? So it's always that question of value versus volume. And you've seen some great case studies of countries like Bhutan that really stuck to their guns about the value opportunity or the value position, but they are now pivoting from that. And it's not that they're moving towards mass tourism, it's still a high end, or let's say a lesser accessible destination with a lot of appeal, but they've just had their first major international concert with Ed Sheeran there. And it's just like they're looking for volume as well, right? So that's
Yeah.
an example of a small kingdom that's quite like the last Shangri-La of the world, which is also making that pivot. You have countries like Thailand, which, you know, they had plenty of tourism pre-COVID, and then post-COVID, they lifted visa requirements for so many nationalities to encourage even more volume, right? To encourage footfall. So governments face the challenge of how do we manage the destinations, because at the end of the day, policy from a government perspective is all about destination management, right? We're talking destination management here. And what happens is, unfortunately, they focus and prioritize on destination marketing and destination promotions instead of destination protection. So
Yeah.
that's really the biggest challenge. It's the fact that it's seen as an economic driver, and that's two things: that brings money and that brings jobs,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
actually investment. So the whole component of resource replenishment, zero waste, circular models, all of that is, from a policy perspective, always put on the back burner, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, I noticed that over the years. I'm no way expert on what was happening in Sri Lanka, but I lived in Thailand for 13 years, and they had the Ministry of Tourism. And you're so right. I mean, on one side, they talked about at that time we have the preserving of the culture, but then there was some kind of a virus happens, whatever it was called at that time, bird flu or whatnot, and then they pushed the marketing budgets up to advertise around the world about flying the friendly skies to Thailand, in just to get the numbers up again. So it has been sort of a continuous. A little bit brakes on, but not much, and then the gas on the pedal again, in just to get more. And from my experience with the Thailand as an example, the over tourism is really a challenge there. I mean, the experience for the traveler could be much better. But how do you see it in Sri Lanka, for instance? Because you have some very beautiful and culturally significant sites, and how has that been addressed now in terms of trying to get some balance to this, or is it still that marketing drive?
Yeah, unfortunately, it's very much the marketing drive and trying to increase the volume and the numbers. The previous governments that we've had lots of governments change in the past couple of years, and they've always been around the 5 million mark. Which, if you take the geographic area, 65,000 square kilometers, 12 times the size of Bali, with about half or less than half the number of arrivals of Bali, 21 million people inhabiting the island. There's space for 5 million travelers for sure.
Yeah.
However, what the issue is Sam-Erik, it's really poor planning, really poor execution enforcement. And so it's all clustered around specific hubs. And we have this tendency to be like very tribal, where we develop everything in clutters. Now, some of the highest value experiences, some of the best valued properties, some of the most successful Sri Lankan owned businesses are in really remote rural areas that are off the beaten path. And they have been there for 30, 40 years, some of these properties, right? Before social media and before the talks of over tourism, just because they got it, right? Why do you come to Sri
Yeah.
Lanka? It's not to be surrounded by other tourists, and not to be surrounded by, avocado toast and, cream cheese bagels, which you can get in New York, London, or Paris,
Yeah.
but to actually experience the country and the culture, and actually switch off and reconnect with yourself and a destination. So Sri Lanka's situation is different to Thailand in that it is more emerging, it is newer, it is far less volume, it is far less connected, it has a more blurry brand reputation. There's a lot of appeal for Sri Lanka, but a lot of uncertainty. Thailand has built a very solid brand, even with its own problems and political crises. It's a solid brand name in the tourism markets globally. From high, middle, low end, Thailand's kind of touched it all. We are similar in Sri Lanka in that we cater to all price points, the budget of budget travelers, all the way up to the luxury private jet segments. We have a little bit of each. And then there's this chunky middle, which comes from all over the world. If it's China, India, Russia, the Middle East, Western Europe, Australia, some of the Americas, we've kind of get travelers from everywhere. So that's how we are similar to Thailand. Thailand also welcomes people from everywhere. But our challenge is really on that spread,
Yeah.
And when we do unlock and open new destinations, my fear, so a lot of the best places, my advice often to government and private sector is don't, develop, don't market, don't promote some of the best places, because it's about protecting and having stringent policies in place that are enforced. And we have failed to do that. So we've got around, it depends who you ask on the classifications, between 21 to 27 national parks in Sri Lanka. Neighboring India has 107 national parks, most of which are larger. But of our 21 to 27 national parks, really 5 of them are frequented, right, by travelers. And of those 5, there are 3 that are significantly over-visited. So the management is an issue when you compare Sri Lanka to Thailand. Overcrowding is certainly an issue if you take core activities and peak times. Surfing right now, people are bumping into each other in the main surf areas. Not nice. People are complaining.
Yeah.
Safaris, the main safaris, it's traffic jams. Not nice. People are
Yeah.
complaining. So in general, you get these sort of key demand drivers which have become congested.
Yeah. What is sort of the attraction for national parks? I mean, just for an ignorant tourist who only think about beaches, what would be sort of the aha experience of going to one of those national parks which is not on the top 5?
Yeah, so we've got 33 different sort of main ecosystems. Let's say I say 33, and the scientists will challenge me because there's sub varieties of ecosystems, from tropical montane forest to highland wet forest to cloud forest to dry zones to shrublands to rainforest to this. So there's a lot of ecology that's technical terminology that scientists will challenge what I just said. But the point I'm trying to make is that there's a lot of diversity in a very compact space. So what people, experienced travelers, people who've been to Central Asia and parts of Oceania and parts of, Central Africa or Sub-Saharan Africa, will say that Sri Lanka is really dense in that there's a concentration of sites and attractions, including these national parks, which are largely protected areas that are a colonial hangover, in that they were designated protected areas influenced by colonial times, but several of them have been designated post-independence. And they offer a variety of experiences and landscapes. However, the national parks that are overcrowded are those that sort of sell the get a picture of a Sri Lankan leopard, which is endemic, right? Or bear, or what we have is the big 5, including the elephant. So the other parks are more slower experiences, more immersive, but they have fantastic offerings in terms of biodiversity and landscapes and just general immersive nature experiences.
Yeah. So interested about your view on since you're a climate reality leader, what are the most significant climate risks tourism businesses overlook, and how should they address them?
Well, last December, it's quite convenient. All these questions are coming with current affairs. I don't have to think too deep or too hard. Just watch a bit of news, or I'm here in Colombo, and in Colombo, you get sort of input from different parts of the island where people are like, "Oh, did you see this and what happened there?" Because people are frustrated with some of what happens with tourism here. And last December, December typically can be quite rainy, early December especially, but the national parks were seeing flooding. Were flooding, and people had to be moved from their hotels in the national parks, and the parks were shut for some time, and people were evacuated. So things that don't typically happen were happening, and that's the result of climate change. Sri Lanka is consistently ranked as one of the most susceptible to the effects of climate change in the world, always in the top 10 countries. So there's a lot of effects, Sam-Erik, from really the natural calamities of weather and flooding and transport and access, but there's also more complex challenges, right? Like migration of people and talent, and then diseases and illnesses and crop and vegetation and food supply chains and water supply. So it's very layered. And again, I'm not a climate change expert, but what my work as a climate reality leader is to advocate for regenerative tourism, saying
Yeah,
this is a solution. It's practical, it's lucrative, and it's fun.
yeah, yeah. So how has sort of that you've been the first Sri Lankan signatory to global tourism climate initiatives influenced your approach to consulting? How are you seen by the Sri Lankans and as the person who actually was the first one of
Yeah, so I think being a signatory, you're referring to Tourism Declares a Climate Emergency. That was when I moved to Sri Lanka and set up my
Yeah,
consultancy practice. And the other one is the Future of Tourism Coalition,
yeah,
which are accessible to all. Really, I think I don't know how I am seen by the market by and large, but what I'm known for, what I specialize in, is really projects and an approach that is resource focused, where you're mindful about the resources and you look to heal the place, the people, and as a result, offer a really high value experience for the customer and for the shareholders in return, right? If you take it from a public policy government angle, it's also looking at practical, implementable changes that are digestible by local communities, and that's often challenging as well. But being a signatory to those organizations and to those causes was really educating myself more than anything on some of the basics, some of the essentials, and some of the best practices globally, because that opens up a global network of practitioners like myself trying to do things in areas around the world that have their own sets of challenges, but albeit challenges the same, right?
yeah. Could you share some examples of what you've been doing now in Sri Lanka, for instance? So I think the audience will be very curious about the things that you're working on, and also on the examples that maybe you can mention.
Yeah, sure. So I won't specifically name projects or clients because of confidentiality reasons, and 90% of my work is behind the scenes on development of new initiatives, if that's projects, if that's policies, if that's programs in agencies, if that's research. So a lot of it is behind the scene. It's mostly behind the scenes. One of my largest projects at the moment is for a diversified conglomerate. They have many industries and some links to tourism. They've got a large parcel of land somewhere in a very exotic part of the island. And we are currently developing, together with leading scientists local and leading hospitality experts international, an entire regeneration of a destination plan. So destination positioning in a regenerative manner, which started off last year with doing detailed ecology and biodiversity studies with expert guidance as to how to set those up, as well as community engagement, which is complex. Now, I can't say too much about this project, but it does include large scale agriculture. It includes significant manual labor, which is somewhat remnants from colonial era. So you're dealing with a lot of sensitivities, right? You're dealing with old world thinking. You're dealing with a very complex local resident population that is used to a colonial way of working, sort of single output agriculture that's quite monocrop, and transforming all of that into a regenerative destination with high value experiences, but most importantly, better quality of life for the local residents, means you've got to get a lot of heads around the table and you've got to have a phased out plan and process. So a lot of the work that I do today or yesterday or the year before and the year before that or 4 years ago when I started this work is probably only going to be realized and seen 10 years down the line, 15 years, 20 years down the line. And I'm okay with that, right?
Yeah,
A lot
yeah,
of people say, show me renderings or pictures. And yeah, everybody can come up with cool eco lodges and render it even with AI. But this is more at a systems level,
yeah.
both in the boardroom and then at the grassroots. Right?
What do you mean with colonial way of working? Because it's a concept here up here in Scandinavia. Maybe it's not known to us. Just to get a feel what you're going through.
Well, it's a very top-down approach. It's a very output-oriented approach. It's imperial. A lot of the lands in Sri Lanka at the scale that I'm talking about, were either tea plantations or before that coffee plantations, monocrop. These are alien species most often that are brought in purely to be a part of the trade, international trade as
Yeah,
commodities, right? So to produce that level, I mean, Sri Lanka is significantly less so in the plantation culture, the plantation economy, as opposed to several countries in Africa or even neighboring India or in Southeast Asia, which are still so largely in that model. We are very small in that sense. But the colonial concept here is really, you take the land, you exploit the land, you monetize the land, you exploit the workers on the land, and you export the good,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
right? And some of tourism is still that, it's like local people, ethnic people or indigenous people, if you want, that are hosting European visitors to allow Europeans to enjoy doing what they do, which is a nice scenery. It's like the concept of a landscaped lawn. And there's a lot in the process of decolonizing tourism, but I
Yeah.
won't go into that.
Okay. Okay. Well, thanks for just sharing that. Uh, as you know, social media for the people love it or people hate it, but it's here, and then social media is way how things are being promoted and destinations are promoted. We see less and less printed promotions, but it's in any of those popular platforms. And now with AI that can produce automatically a bunch of videos, so you don't actually need a person. It's all you just write a text and you can get the video promotion created for you if you want to promote the destination. But what do you see is the role of social media in promoting responsible tourism, and how can it mitigate the over-tourism challenges? Because that has been an issue people are talking about.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think social media, I mean, you're going to see trends like digital detoxes where people go offline a lot more, right? Where they don't take their phones on their holiday, or they'll take their phone, but they'll put it away for retreats and wellness experiences and have more immersive experiences off digital devices simply because they're so ingrained. But it's going to change with different generations. You know, people who are 5, 10 years younger than me already are so different in their lifestyles, the way they consume information, the way they engage with their devices versus my parents or grandparents' generation or what have you. So it's all quite evolving. I think social media has a huge role to play in advocacy, awareness, communicating the positives, the negatives of certain consumer choices and behaviors. Governments have the ability to control what can be geotagged, where there is data access or internet access. Are we pin dropping selfies in locations that are not exploited? Do we want to show everybody where the perfect photo shoot is in some really remote wild areas? A lot of destinations have opened up because of social media, but they've also been ruined because of. So I think when you see the stories going out there about Barcelona, about the Balearic Islands, about Venice, about some parts of Greece, especially European summers, that's helping deter a lot of the footfall and traffic that would otherwise still come. So social media can be extremely powerful, extremely useful, and I look forward to seeing what good it brings to international travel and tourism. It also goes the same for reviews, for accountability, and for sharing both positive and negative experiences. So we talk about PR all the time, but I think there's some places in the world right now that need some really harsh, bad press, right? If you think about air pollution across Southeast Asia right now, most capital cities, the air quality is just unhealthy. If it's
Yes.
Bangkok in Thailand, or if it's in Dhaka in Bangladesh, Delhi, Mumbai, here, even in Colombo today, we are in red, which never really
Oh yeah.
happens, right? So we're at a very high level of unhealthy air. For all demographics, not just for the sick or the immunocompromised, but for everybody. Where's the bad press around that to ensure that governments make appropriate steps, take action, and businesses as well course correct, right? Because it might not deter lots of travelers, but there will be the media doing its job. So social
Yeah.
media is a very powerful tool, very powerful platform, all kinds of channels, all kinds of formats for all different audiences that can be used to really course correct the trajectory in which we are at now.
Yeah, I mean, in Finland, we have never talked about something called over tourism to Finland, because it's not one of those mass tourism destination, except maybe for some cruises. But now the discussion is starting Rovaniemi, which is the south of the Arctic Lapland. You get 40 flights today every day coming in, and the people who live in Rovaniemi. Now people are tourists are walking and knocking on the window to see who's living in their house, and they're feeling feeling a little bit disturbed. And now you're starting to get some stories about that spoiling of the nature, and you start to hear more and more. So we are starting the conversation finally here in Finland also about the places where over tourism is becoming an issue, and I'm sure there will be a day when they will tax every visitor who's coming and or whatnot, just to see if they're still enticed to come to look at the
Yeah.
reindeers.
I mean, here's the thing. I mean, it's funny you bring up Rovaniemi. I actually, in 2017, a couple of years before leaving Europe, I went up to Sariselska in Inari
Yeah,
during the Kamos, right? The Kamos period of where there's no sun, and it's the Northern Lights. And it was this bucket list thing where you want to see the Northern Lights. And
yeah,
living in Amsterdam, it was quite easily accessible. Flights were quite expensive, but it's close.
Yeah.
and accommodation was ridiculous. But I was shocked. I was like, whoa, it was buses and buses of people. Everything was about tourism. It was
Yeah.
selling this. I didn't realize that it's a, the Santa story is also from there. So everybody was
Yeah.
bringing their kids. And I thought it was quite a disaster, and it was really hard to encounter or meet real Finnish people until I went to the staff of my hotel and I said, where are you guys going to hang out tonight? Where do the staff hang out? Then they
Yeah.
took me with them. And then I went into a real local Finnish bar where all the staff from the different hotels were. And they probably thought I was just an immigrant worker, because of my appearance. And it was fantastic. And I was like,
Yeah.
wow, and there was nowhere to go to a sauna, and a real sauna didn't exist. So, and you did the reindeer thing and the ice fishing and the igloo and the whole snowmobile
Yeah.
things, but it's all very, I think, for such a sensitive ecosystem up there, it's extremely sensitive and vulnerable to climate change. There needs to be far stricter
Yeah.
regulation. I don't know if taxing is the solution.
No, I don't
I
think so either. I mean,
it needs to be more comprehensive than just taxing, but
sure, sure.
really just balancing and spreading it. It's the same problems we have here. Yeah.
Yeah, they think like this taxing is like a band-aid, Yeah. But now I think we talked about different generations and so on, and you're keen a little bit on hospitality education. If I understand that, in what ways do you think the traditional hospitality education needs to evolve to prepare our future leaders for the challenges ahead of them or where we are now?
Yeah, I love this question because I'm faced with it firsthand in some of my work I do as teaching in Sri Lanka. It's the practical and tacit knowledge of P&L cost management, right? Just understanding the P&L, understanding costs, and that directly translates to resource management. Like, why are my cost items or line items for electricity so high? Oh, because the electricity we use are imported fossil fuels or non-renewable sources, so energy costs are high. Wow, it's like 1 + 1 = 2. That's not taught really in hotel schools when you think about
No.
how much energy our industry uses. So basics like that. The same for water, garbage management and waste disposal, the opportunity for upcycling of businesses. I was lecturing some students yesterday and toying with them these entrepreneurial business opportunities and all these gaps and all these stress points, what businesses can be made. And some of them came up with some interesting ideas, but you really had to push them to think like that. Right?
Yeah.
Food, if you think of it, because it's a resource intensive industry, Sam-Erik, and it's also a non essential industry, right? Leisure, traveling on holiday, it's non essential. People will say, yeah, but we need restaurants. They're essential. We need food. Well, no, you don't really need restaurants. You need food, right?
Yeah.
And water and air. But you don't need a buffet. So I think looking at how resource intensive it is in the classrooms at an early stage is the best alongside the practical exposure. That's how hospitality education needs to evolve. Solutions oriented. It's super traditional still, departments of a hotel, usali, PNL. But the reality is the industry has somewhat evolved and it's still so resource intensive. So
Yeah.
students needs to start thinking and being resourceful.
Yeah, I mean, what gives them an opportunity is that not what the teacher can tell them, but what the student can bring in, because they are coming with a fresh pair of eyes and they are quite fearless and they don't have that burden of doing things for years. So I would like to see that more and more that they start to get projects and even challenge the teacher about how things could do better. So I mean that I love to see happening. Yeah. So
Absolutely.
the smaller hospitality, how can these, do you have a lot of smaller hospitality businesses in Sri Lanka? And how can they, how are they facing the competition with larger corporations while staying committed to authenticity and sustainability?
Yeah, so we say around just over 80%, and the sources, the credible data for this is very difficult to get a hold of, but from the numbers I have and a general statistic base here, census base here, is that around 80%, closer to 85% really, is what we call MSMEs in the hospitality and tourism sector. MSME stands for micro, small, medium enterprises, right?
Yep.
Private, limited, owned, single owners, solopreneurs, family businesses, multi-generational family businesses. But they're looking, they have one property or they have 5 properties of, on average, 5 to 10 rooms, right? So really micro level small businesses. And that's the bulk. I think that they definitely can compete and have a competitive advantage going forward, not just in this country, but all over the world. People are literally looking for more authentic, bespoke, off the beaten path experiences. They're not looking to be in crowds or queues or lines. You have the new emerging wealth, the new emerging middle classes, lower middle classes, or even upper middle classes that now have spending power from parts of the world that didn't have spending power, that didn't have passport privilege, and some of them are still impressed by large cruise ships and big casinos and Vegas, Macau style situations. But there's a larger share of people who are continuing to seek out experiences that are more mindful, that are more immersive, and that are literally not the big chain, big block hotels, right? And
Yeah.
at the same time, I think lending institutions and banks and so on will have to make a pivot because you have to always look at where the money is, who is financing these mega projects. And unfortunately, for as long as that continues, you won't see a drastic shift in the supply, but you will see that the P&Ls look better in businesses that are more, what's the word I'm looking for? A little bit more sharp, lean maybe, but also a little bit more focused in their offering.
Yeah, yeah. What advice would you give to industrial leaders struggling to turn sustainable goals into actionable strategies? Because that's always the case. Maybe they want to not to deal with it, but we should take them, we should face them, and they should be answering those responsibilities.
Yeah, I think I just go back to what I said earlier on. That's a very simple response. It's about resources, right? It's about looking at the
Yeah,
bottom line. If it doesn't make financial sense or if it doesn't make economic sense, how can it make ecological sense,
yeah,
right? And that's it, basically, going forward. If your objectives are to be really a player that is contributing positively to the broader ecosystem, and by ecosystem I don't mean like flora fauna ecosystem of biodiversity, but I mean the ecosystem of doing business and trade and travel and tourism and commerce, and the ecosystem of people moving and talent moving. If you want to contribute positively to that and make a difference and really add value, I think value is the key word. Look at the value drivers, and that translates to action. It's like I said about utilities. Are you acting on your utilities bills? Why not? Okay,
yeah,
are you investing in different utilities which are then more purpose driven, more renewable, more local, more light on the environment, and still allow you to service a high quality product? Then that is an actionable strategy, right?
yeah. Yeah, we talked about the over tourism, culture preservation. Uh, uh, could be each be a thesis on their own. If you were to write a thesis yourself, what aspects of regenerative tourism or hospitality would you choose to explore and why?
Ownership, I think business model ownership, land ownership, destination management, and the distribution of responsibility, accountability in that, right? Local versus central versus, federal, national, state, divisional governments. Those are sort of the areas that interest me the most because they are very complex, very
Mm,
deep rooted, very specific to a place. But how do you redistribute wealth? How do you make these models more equitable? I think that there needs to be a lot more work in that because everybody's talking about regeneration. Okay, we do farm to table. We have an organic farm field, and our guests go and pluck the vegetables, and then we put the scraps back into the soil, and their poo goes into the soil, and the soil is nourished. But everybody's doing that. I think
yeah,
it's more from a systemic perspective. And another thing is how do you make travel more equitable? I was on a podcast 2 weeks ago about balancing tourism, the over tourism podcast or so, and it's about they're saying there's so many people from northern and western Europe that have so much mileage on their passports, even though they come from countries which have small populations, right? But they're very wealthy. Scandinavia is a great example. The Netherlands, Belgium, Benelux, UK, and even the US to an extent. You're very, very wealthy, well traveled, yet they still have the spending power and the passport privilege to continue to do that. Whereas if you look at the global south, Latin America, Southern Africa, and where I am in this part of the world, Southern Asia, which has the world's biggest population base, you don't have passport privilege and you don't have economic privilege to be able to travel. Yet the penalization or the impacts of the global north's actions are still affecting. So when you're talking about regenerative tourism, how proactive are you? How equitable is it? And then those are the areas where I think it's worth studying further with a global south lead on that.
yeah, yeah. Very good. Now, what advice would you give somebody who is in 17, 18 years old and is dreaming of or considering getting into this industry? Any particular tips you would give them how they should get started, or should they even get into this industry?
Well, I think the nice thing, Sam-Erik, and I'm sure you'll agree because you've had much broader perspective than I have, and a very vibrant career yourself, is firstly, what is the industry, right? Because it's so broad now.
Yeah.
It includes and entails so much. And some of the best hoteliers, the best chefs, the best tour operators, all of that, they came from outside. They didn't come from a hotel school. They didn't come from years and years working for brand X or for destination Y. They were doing something else. And their passion project was to have a natural wine bar, or their passion project was to create this, natural healing retreat with, bamboo structures. Their passion project was to create their own line of, organic vegetable stews, right? Just as an example. So figure out where your passion is.
Yeah.
And if that's hard, because not everybody is born with that and is not able to decipher that immediately, keep getting at it. Keep trying things until you figure out where your passion lies and where you add value and have a sense of and a feeling of purpose.
Yeah. And my tip would be, if you really want to work in a hotel, work in the best hotel in the world, and also get yourself somebody who you look up to. Get a mentor. A mentor can be very helpful to provide advice and give you some guidance. And when I talk to some of the colleagues that have very good careers, they always mention that the mentor was the one that helped them to keep on a certain course. But also they caution that be brave, don't be afraid to take risks, because this career is also that you go from one place to another and never regret that decision, because you learn every time from every those cases that you have been going through.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think a mentor is very important. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Chalana, I think this has been a very good discussion, and we are basically just touching a little bit on all kinds of topics, considering the time, but your valuable input has been excellent. So I just want to thank you very much for the time with me here, and that we had a good discussion. So look forward to bringing you on another time for the Social Hotelier podcast.
Thank you for having me, Sam-Erik, and thank you for the work you do. I appreciate it. It was a lot of fun. Thanks.
Thank you for tuning in to the Social Hotelier. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to leave us a review, give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button to stay updated. We have an incredible lineup of guests coming your way, so stay tuned for more thought-provoking conversations. Until next time, take care and keep exploring.